True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
On December 27th, 2011, in a small town outside of St. Louis, Missouri, Russ Faria called 911. His wife, Betsy, was lying in a pool of blood, dead, with a kitchen knife protruding from her neck. The house was in disarray, too, with shopping bags and Christmas decorations scattered about the floor. Russ had been at game night with some friends that evening. When he returned home to the horrific, heartbreaking scene, Russ said, his first thought was that Betsy had taken her own life. Considering Betsy's history of depression and her prolonged battle with cancer, it was really the only thing that made any sense to him. But then first responders found over 50 stab wounds in Betsy's body. A search of the house turned up a pair of Russ's slippers in the bedroom closet, stained with Betsy's blood. So this was a homicide, and Russ Faria was the prime suspect. Join us at the quiet end for Pam's Path to Prison. As it turns out, Betsy Faria's murder was just the beginning in a chain of bizarre events involving Betsy's friend, Pam Hupp. Pam would tell police all about the troubles in Betsy and Russ's marriage. In fact, things had gotten so bad between them, Pam said, that Betsy had changed her life insurance policy's beneficiary from Russ to Pam. But over time, Pam changed and embellished her story with detectives, raising questions about her credibility and the depths of her conniving and malicious nature. So was Pam really Betsy's best friend? Or was Pam a stone-cold killer who put her own greed above all else? Let's talk about it. Let's find out.
Interesting case.
Oh, that's putting it mildly.
Yes. So we're going to drink a beer from Missouri. This one is Tank 7, brewed by Boulevard Brewing Company in Kansas City. This is a farmhouse ale, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Hazy gold color, a huge white fluffy head, a lot of lace, nice aroma of citrus and pepper. And it's got a grapefruity taste, some late pepper, nice medium-bodied, quaffable beer.
I don't know about the pepper. Sounds peppery.
It's not.
No. Well, you mentioned it twice, which really puts my hackles up.
I mean, it is peppery, but it's a nice peppery. It's just kind of a spicy. It's not a hot peppery.
Okay, because usually I enjoy a farmhouse ale. It's got the funkiness. It's got the haziness.
Yeah, you'll like this.
I'm thinking I will, yeah. All right, Dickie, why don't you open up a couple of those for us?
Okay.
All right, let's settle in here down at the quiet end. And this is a story that most of our listeners are probably familiar with, I'm going to say. Dateline has covered the hell out of this.
They sure have. And there's still going to be more coverage.
Yes, but I have found it fascinating from the beginning and very much looking forward to talking about it today.
Well, it is, as you said, a fascinating case. And twists and turns and all sorts of things going on here.
Well, and kind of an unlikely person behind it all, really.
Well, yeah. I mean, at first glance, you'd say, she couldn't have done this stuff.
Well, this is a blonde, middle-aged suburban woman. Kind of the kind of woman that I lived with when I was raising a family in my neighborhood, and kind of a typical-looking middle-class lady. But she does have a really evil side.
Boy, does she ever.
Yes. So let's get going about it. I think we have a lot to talk about.
Oh, we do. So let's start off talking about Betsy Faria a little bit, okay?
Sure, good idea.
So when she was growing up, Betsy was the most outgoing of the four sisters in her family. She has been described as colorful and gregarious, a bit of a character, but in the best possible way. When she was still a teenager, she worked as a DJ at weddings and other events. And she was pretty good at getting a party going, even to the extent of getting out on the dance floor herself to liven things up. She was a single mother with 2 daughters, Mariah and Leah, when she met Russ Faria. Russ was a happy-go-lucky type as well. He was always smiling and joking, and the two seemed perfect for each other. Russ said that Betsy was the best thing to ever happen to him. She had faith in him, and she encouraged him to go back to school and get a degree, which would improve his career opportunities and his life. The two of them got married in 2000. Russ bonded pretty quickly with Betsy's daughters. They were quite young at the time.
Well, yeah, but the marriage wasn't perfect. None are. They did argue quite a bit, and they even ended up being separated for over a year at one point. But then they went to a church, and they were involved in a program on building a better marriage, and that helped to bring them back together. They still loved each other and wanted the relationship to work, and things were good after that for the Farias. But life can throw you curveballs, and in January of 2010, Betsy was diagnosed with breast cancer. Russ stayed by her side as she had a mastectomy and went through chemotherapy. Betsy really amazed her family and friends as she continued to live her life as she always had, with some gusto. She continued to play tennis, and she was very active throughout it all. Then, in 2011, she got the good news that her cancer was in remission. She and Russ celebrated, and they even organized a Caribbean cruise and invited friends and family to come along. But sadly, before the cruise even happened, Betsy learned that her cancer had returned. It had metastasized to her liver, and it was terminal. The doctor told her she could have a few years to live, but that was about it. And Betsy and Russ decided, well, we better go enjoy that cruise. So she described this as a second honeymoon, even telling her friends they had great sex, they had a wonderful time. Betsy even got a chance to swim with dolphins. That's something she'd always wanted to do. So even though she had this terminal diagnosis, which would make a lot of us not want to get out of bed, she kept going and lived life to the fullest, and I respect that.
Now, Betsy met Pam Hupp when they both worked at a State Farm insurance office in 2001. Even though Pam was 11 years older than Betsy, they got along really well. Betsy seemed to make friends with everyone she met. She had a bubbly personality that just attracted people. And truthfully, she felt a bit sorry for Pam, who didn't seem to have many friends. So she was happy to take Pam under her wing. Betsy was the life of every party. Her youthful pink cheeks, curly hair, and bright blue eyes gave her the look of a happy cherub, and she was almost always smiling. A warm-hearted person, kind of flighty, and she continued to work part-time as a DJ to supplement her income. And that's been something from her high school years. She's continued to do that.
Yes, yep. And of course, we never met Betsy, but just looking at the pictures of her we've seen and video on Dateline, she was just super cute and looked happy and very bubbly, as they say. Pam, on the other hand, was more reserved and more serious. She seemed adept with office politics, she was very logical, and she even was offering helpful advice to her manager. Her level-headed decision-making was admired by her co-workers, and they would often look to her when they had questions about anything at work. So, at least on the surface, Pam seemed like a good employee.
Yeah, well, she got along with the other co-workers.
Yeah.
And did a good job.
Yes, but there were things, which we'll get into.
Yeah,
there were definitely things.
There's always things.
Yes. So Pam had grown up as the third of 4 children in the Newman family of Delwood, Missouri. Her dad had a good job with Union Electric, and her mother was a school teacher. And in high school, she was on the pom-pom squad and quite popular. She had good grades, but then she was boy crazy. Not that unusual. She started seeing a boy who she really adored in her senior year. Annie took her to the prom, but then 3 months later, Pam was pregnant. The Newman family were devout Catholics, so her mother was quite upset and even felt stigmatized by her daughter's pregnancy. So Pam married the baby's father, but still she couldn't help show some resentment because her friends were going off to college, which she had planned on, and now she was stuck raising a daughter in a cheap apartment. So after about 6 years together, Pam got a divorce, and soon after she married another man, Mark Hupp, a carpenter who had played minor league baseball, and Pam and Mark would have a son. In 1989, the family of 4 moved to Florida, and they stayed there for quite a while, returning in 2001 to Missouri where they bought a house in the St. Louis suburb of O'Fallon. And shortly after that, Pam took that job with State Farm.
Now, Pam's manager would have good things to say about Pam's job performance, which we had mentioned. But, as you'd also mentioned, there are some odd things. Pam told him that she is somehow involved with the FBI and had some type of security clearance, but she never would elaborate on that. The other thing that aroused some suspicion was that some employees' cars ended up being keyed in the parking lot while she was working there. And the same thing happened in her own neighborhood with keying of cars. So there were a lot of rumors going around, and one of the major ones was that Pam was responsible for doing that.
Well, yes, I guess these people whose cars were keyed were people who Pam had reason to not be happy with. So that's a clue right there.
Isn't it?
So Pam just had something a little bit acerbic about her that she kind of could keep hidden for the most part. But people noticed that she wasn't quite who she liked to project herself to be.
Right.
In the Hupp subdivision where they lived, most of the families were young with children. Mark, her husband, was quiet and seemed happy to help a neighbor in need, while Pam was a bit of a busybody. And when there was any drama between residents in the neighborhood, Pam liked to stir the pot. But overall, she didn't socialize a lot with her neighbors. But they would remember some unexplained incidents, like the time when some nasty anonymous letters were sent to one neighbor, and then another time when some bloody animal bones were left in a neighbor's yard. So after working together for a while, Pam and Betsy didn't see each other for years. But then in 2010, Pam was right there to support Betsy as she dealt with her cancer diagnosis. And looking back, this is something to make note of. Because when Betsy was diagnosed with cancer, all of a sudden, Pam wanted to be close to her. She even took Pam to her chemotherapy appointments and stayed with her throughout the treatments. And it wasn't like Pam was her best friend at that point. She was more of a former co-worker and acquaintance.
Yeah.
But she got right in there, so you have to wonder, was there something going on there in her mind to manipulate even back then?
Well, as you look back on it, sure.
It seems like it, yeah.
Now they had, kind of grown apart?
Well, they weren't working together anymore, yeah.
So that's how they grew apart.
Yeah, and they weren't super close to begin with.
Right. But they were fairly close as co-workers, and when they weren't co-workers, they weren't close anymore.
Yeah, I've had a lot of relationships like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't we all? Now, Pam was not one of the friends who went on the cruise with Betsy and Russ in 2011, but she was with Betsy nearly every day after she returned home from the cruise. On December 22nd, Pam went to Betsy's tennis club to watch her play. Then on the following day, she and Betsy went to the library and asked the librarian to witness her signature on a change of beneficiary form for her life insurance policy. This form removed Russ as the beneficiary and replaced him with Pam. Pam would later say that Betsy wanted her as the beneficiary so she could give money to her two daughters. But we know that Betsy and Pam had worked in insurance, and they knew how to write up a policy. Betsy would have known how to make her daughters the beneficiary, if that's what she was really trying to do. She didn't need Pam to do it.
Right. So the question here is, why did Betsy and Pam go to a library to have a change of beneficiary forms signed by a 23-year-old librarian, so someone who probably didn't have a lot of knowledge about legal forms, right? When they could have done this at the office or anywhere,
sure.
Really. And Betsy certainly would have known how to make her daughters the beneficiaries. Why would she make Pam the beneficiary and then ask her to give money to her daughters? And there are some reasons. Some of them do sound like they could be true about why this happened, but we'll certainly get into more details on that as we go through the story.
Yeah, saying that the 23-year-old librarian was maybe young and not well-versed. I mean, you take something in to be notarized, they don't read it. They just notarize it.
Yes, but it wasn't notarized, Stephen. Why wouldn't you have it notarized? Why would you just have someone in a library sign it? It's just odd.
Yeah.
So 5 days after that was Tuesday, December 27th, 2011. And Pam showed up unannounced at Betsy's mother's apartment in Lake St. Louis to take Betsy to her chemotherapy appointment. Betsy's mom, Janet, told Pam that Betsy had already gone with her friend Bobby, and Betsy had texted Pam telling her that she didn't need Pam to pick her up and take her to chemo because she wanted to go with Bobby. She hadn't seen Bobby in quite a while. Pam would later claim that she never got Betsy's text that day, but the phone records would show her responding to this text from Betsy saying bummer. So we do know that Pam knew Betsy told her, you don't need to take me to chemo. But for some reason, Pam was insistent on being there.
Yeah. And we're going to find out that Pam lies a lot.
Oh, yes. Yes, she does. So Pam actually drove to the cancer center in St. Peter's and sat with Betsy and Bobby throughout the treatment, which was completely unnecessary. And Bobby would recall that Betsy had been really surprised to see Pam show up there. When the treatment was over, Betsy returned to her mother's house with Bobby, and Pam went home and had dinner with her husband, Mark. But then Pam drove back to Lake St. Louis to pick up Betsy and give her a ride home to her house on Sumac Drive in Troy. So that was just a little bit odd.
Just
so
a bit.
We'll stick a pin in that. Russ had game night every Tuesday with some of his friends. So his plan was that he would pick up Betsy afterwards because his friend who was hosting game night lived just 5 minutes from her mother's home. So Betsy was all set with a ride from her mom's back home. But for some reason, Pam was insisting on doing that. So Russ texted his wife Betsy at noon that day, going to game and then come get you. We'll call when on way. Should not be too late. And Betsy replied, okay, great, honey. But after her chemo treatment, Betsy texted, Pam Hupp wants to bring me home to bed. And then she explained that her white blood cell count was low and she was tired, so Pam was being helpful. Seemed like Pam cared about her.
Yes.
So Russ texted, she's bringing you? Just to be sure, because he wanted Betsy to have a ride. And Betsy answered, yes, she offered and I accepted. I didn't get much sleep because Mom snored. She'd spent the previous night at her mother's. But Pam later claimed that it was Betsy who had asked her for this ride. She picked up Betsy at her mom's place and drove her to her home. And when they pulled into Betsy's driveway, Pam called up her husband, Mark. And she put Betsy on the phone with him. So Betsy, just always kind of cheerful and friendly, said, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to Mark, and hung up, went into her house. That day, Russ had worked from home until 5 p.m. He worked in IT, and he had called Betsy afterwards. Then he went and got gas at a Conoco station in Troy, and he called his own mom to let her know he wouldn't be coming to her place for dinner. At 5:56 p.m., he stopped at a convenience store in Lake St. Louis for 2 bottles of Snapple, some dog food, and cigarettes. His cell phone pinged in these areas, and there's also CCTV footage of him pumping gas and buying the stuff at the convenience store. After he did that, he drove to his friend Mike Corbin's house to meet his game night friends and spend a few hours there.
Between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m., Russ's cell phone pinged in the area of Mike's house. One of their friends couldn't make it, so he ended up not having enough people to play the game they'd planned to play. But Mike had some movies, Cormac McCarthy's The Road and Conan the Barbarian. Now, everybody that watched it thought that The Road was boring.
Now, how is that possible?
I know.
What a great book and movie. Of course, it's right up my alley. Anything apocalyptic, sign me up. But they had different tastes, clearly, because they enjoyed Conan the Barbarian, which I certainly wouldn't.
Yeah, when they were watching Conan, they were smoking some weed, so maybe that helped encourage their enjoyment.
It's just a matter of taste, yeah.
So then around 9 o'clock, Russ and 2 others left for home. Russ stopped at an Arby's, bought a couple sandwiches, and he ate those on his way home. The Arby's receipt was time-stamped 9:09 p.m., and it was a 25-mile ride from Mike Corbin's house to Russ Faria's house. But once home, Russ entered his house. He set down the bag of dog food, removed his coat, and walked into the living room, calling for Betsy. And that's when he saw her lying on the floor. So his first thought was that she'd been ill. But then he saw all of the blood. Her wrists were slashed, and one of the kitchen knives was protruding from her throat. So she had attempted suicide before, and she had terminal cancer. So Russ's first thought was that she had killed herself.
Yeah, so apparently all he saw was the knife in the throat and the cut wrists.
Yeah.
So that's what made him think that. So Russ called 911. It was 9:41 p.m. He was very emotional, I'd say close to hysterical. He told the operator, "My wife killed herself. But then once Betsy was examined by first responders, they knew that this was no way a suicide. She had over 50 stab wounds in her body, puncturing her lungs, liver, and spleen. But most of these wounds were hidden by her clothing. So, in Russ's defense, all he had seen were her wrists and her throat cut. Now also, Betsy's body was cold and rigor mortis had set in when the first responders arrived at the Faria house. Blood on her head and arms was already dry and coagulated. The EMS supervisor said that she had been dead for over an hour.
Well, if rigor mortis is setting in, it's way more than an hour.
Well, I think she's lowballing it, to say at least.
Yeah.
But let's just think here. Russ has a really good alibi, which is really the shocking part of this story, right?
He has an amazing alibi.
Yes. Now, these knife wounds were deep, hitting bone, penetrating one of her eyes, cutting into her skull, and opening her right carotid artery. And her wrists were cut through to the bones as well. Maybe not something someone would do to themselves.
Yeah. Well, they certainly wouldn't keep on stabbing themselves.
Well, no, of course not. The police officer at the scene was Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Chris Hollingsworth, and he agreed that Russ seemed very upset. But he also noted that there were very few tears coming from his eyes. So this is where we get into how police, many of us, I'm guilty of it myself, try and determine if someone's telling the truth by their behavior. Are there real tears coming from their eyes? All this kind of thing. Which I think sometimes has merit, but it's certainly, you can't make decisions based on that, I would say.
No, you can't. You've said it many times before. Everyone grieves in a different way.
Right.
And it wasn't that his eyes were dry. It was just that the officer didn't think there were enough tears coming out of his eyes.
Yes. This is all an interpretation of how they're perceiving Russ, what they think of him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Way subjective.
Way, yes. So Deputy Hollingsworth took Russ out to his cruiser and tried to keep him calm by talking about the area where they had both grown up, kind of making small talk. And according to the deputy, Russ seemed able to chat normally. He even chuckled with him at one point, so this was suspicious to the deputy. Russ was generally very emotional, though, and he did appear devastated by the loss of his wife. And this would be held against him, too, interpreted as being over the top or acting. One of the detectives asked him why he hadn't hugged his wife when he found her, as if that was suspicious that he didn't touch her. But let's think about the scene he walked into a little bit. Right? She was covered in blood and she had a knife sticking out of her throat. It's really not the kind of scenario where you're going to cradle a loved one. Not that you wouldn't, but I could see why you might not.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So at the police station, Russ was recorded while he sat by himself in an interrogation room. He said, "No, Betsy," and he cried, praying for it not to be true. During the interview, he consistently denied killing her. "I wasn't there. I didn't kill my wife," he said again and again. He agreed to take a polygraph test, which he did the next day, and he was told by the police that he had failed. And I think that's basically all they said. You failed the test.
Yeah, the thinking now is that it wasn't even a real polygraph. It was just something to try and get him to confess. And we'll have a little bit more to talk about on that. But the next morning, the police went to Mike Corbin's house to question him and his girlfriend Angie about Russ's alibi of being with them at their house for game night. He certainly had not seemed nervous, and at one point, Russ had nodded off during the movie, Mike told the police. 3 days later, the investigators returned to the Corbin's house. They picked up the couple, put them in separate cars, and took them to the station to be interrogated separately. They did the same thing with 2 other friends who had been there for game night on the night that Betsy was murdered. So by this time, Pam had also spoken with the police. According to Pam, Betsy had been wanting to move back to Lake St. Louis and stay with her mother, so she would be closer to her chemo treatments and her tennis club. Pam told detectives that Betsy had been planning to tell Russ her idea about moving on the night she was killed, and she had known that he would be furious about this. Pam added that she felt really guilty herself for leaving Betsy there to face Russ all alone, because Pam said Russ had a very violent temper. Russ's family didn't believe that Russ was capable of killing anyone, least of all Betsy, who they knew he really loved. But Betsy's mother started to believe that Russ was responsible for her daughter's death, and she would recall a few times in the past when Russ had mentioned how he wanted to beat up some guy, and how once he had run after a boyfriend of one of Betsy's daughters with a baseball bat, just starting to think maybe Russ is violent. Although before this, she was really quite close with Russ and liked him.
Yeah, well, she's got this important information for the police.
Well, and the thing is, when a woman dies, of course you're going to look at her husband, and you're going to look at anything he's ever done that was a little bit
Sure.
off to you.
Yep.
Especially because it seems like the police were just very focused on Russ from the very beginning.
Yeah, they were. They added up Russ's behavior, being calm one minute and crying the next, and they looked at Pam's stories, and they said, well, we got our guy. Pam told the police a story about Russ putting a pillow over Betsy's face and telling her that this is how it will feel when she dies. And then her final thing that she told police was that Russ had talked about getting a life insurance payout after Betsy's death.
A lot of these things that make them look at Russ as the suspect, as the only suspect, are things that Pam is telling them.
Right.
And they really seem to like Pam. They believed everything Pam told them, it seems, and were just kind of buddy-buddy with her. It got to that point, really. As far as people who knew Russ, his family and friends, they said there's no way Russ would put a pillow over Betsy's face.
No. In January, Russ was arrested and was charged with first-degree murder. The police charged him despite his having an airtight alibi. And the prosecutor had decided that Russ's game night friends had actually helped him plan and cover up the murder of Betsy. Now, how many people were playing? There were another 4 or 5 people?
Yeah, 4. That to me is over-the-top crazy.
So they all got together and decided we're going to lie to the police to protect our friend.
These are normal, nice, working-class people, not criminals, nothing to gain from this. It's just a crazy theory to me. But they rolled
really
with
is.
it. They really rolled with it, though.
Well, that's just laziness or incompetence on their part.
Absolutely, it's wrong, yes. The media reported that marital problems had led to Betsy's murder by her husband, so the media was just buying whatever the police told them as well. I don't know, maybe that's their job, is just to report what the police tell them. But it seems like the tide turned on Russ very quickly.
It sure did.
There were statements about a friend of Betsy's saying that she had become uncomfortable with her husband and was considering leaving Russ. There was no mention of him being seen on the CCTV footage of how he had been with friends from 6 to 9 that night, and he even had an Arby's receipt. So the prosecutor said that, well, obviously these game night friends had lied for Russ. These are people who are watching Conan the Barbarian and smoking some weed together. So we're supposed to believe that these people were actually helping to plot a murder. So the prosecutor said that these friends had lied, and they had even held his phone so that it would ping at the game night house. And then one of them drove it over to Russ after going to Arby's for him and bringing the receipt back as well.
Yep.
It's kind of crazy.
When you look at it, and again, we know the ending to this story, but when you look at that, it begs, well, it's just amazing.
It is.
That they went with that. I mean, holy cow. So they're all lying for him, and even to the point where they'd keep his cell phone and then drive it so it would ping off the right areas.
Yes, and get the Arby's receipt to put it in his car so the police will find it.
Yeah.
And so he had purposely, before going to game night, made sure he'd be on CCTV. It's very elaborate, and they would have no motive to do it.
Right. Except that they're Russ's friends.
Yes.
Jeez,
Well,
come on.
right. But police have made up their mind on this. And Pam is like their star witness.
Yeah.
She's very cooperative with the investigation. She offered up her own DNA, fingerprints. She said whatever's needed. Her version of that evening was that she had dropped Betsy off at home around 7. Then she drove home, watched some TV, took a shower, and went to sleep. And she explained, well, I normally shower in the morning and before bed at night, so, okay, sure.
Yeah, by the same token, she was the last person to see Betsy alive.
That's right.
So don't you think she deserves a little more of an investigation?
You would think so, but like I said, they just locked onto Russ right away.
Yeah. So speaking of the night of Betsy's murder, Pam also told investigators that Betsy's house had been dark and the doors were unlocked, which she said was odd for Betsy not to have her keys with her. But then it turned out, according to Pam, it was Russ who told her not to bring her purse with the keys when she went to her chemo appointment.
Another thing that doesn't make sense to me.
None whatsoever.
But Pam's story changed, too. So in her first version of events, Pam said that she did not go inside of Betsy's house when she dropped her off. But then she would change it to say that she had gone in, but just to turn on the light. Then she said that she had gone into Betsy's house. In fact, she'd walked all the way back to Betsy's bedroom because Betsy had wanted to show her a jewelry box that Russ had given her for Christmas. Remember, this is just a couple days after Christmas.
Right.
Pam said that when she left Betsy's house, Betsy was on her couch, just kind of cozy, cuddled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. Later on, though, Pam would say that, well, it actually makes more sense to me now that Betsy walked me to the door before I left. So these things may have served as some pretty good red flags for police, but they didn't see it that way.
Well, they sure didn't. So Pam's phone records would show that Pam called Betsy at 7:27 p.m. and that she had still been in Troy, near Betsy's house. So when she was asked about this, Pam said that she had called Betsy to let her know she had gotten home. But when it was pointed out that it wasn't possible for Pam to have been home by that time, she changed her story to say that she had called Betsy to let her know she was almost home. And she explained that she had stopped at a fork in the road to make the call. Betsy did not answer or call her back.
So, when they looked at her location, she was only blocks away from Betsy's house, or she could have even been in Betsy's driveway.
Yeah.
So there was no way she was almost home, or home. No way at all.
No.
When Pam did get to her home that evening, she called her son, who lived in a nearby condo complex. Then she texted Betsy and got no response. Then she called Betsy's mother, Janet, and told her that she was worried about Betsy. She worried that Betsy was mad at her for not staying with her and leaving her to face Russ on her own. Janet tried calling her daughter Betsy then, but she got no answer either.
So police went back to Pam's house to interview her husband, Mark. But when they interviewed him, they allowed Pam to stay with him throughout the whole interview.
That's a huge mistake.
You can't do that.
It's funny how they knew to separate the game night friends. But Pam was allowed to stay there with Mark as he was interviewed. It's almost like Pam was one of the police detectives. She kind of insinuated herself into this. Which, I don't know, if you're a smart detective, maybe you should have kind of sensed something funny with her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Mark said that he had been at his house by himself on December 27th. He said that Pam had called to let him know that she'd arrived at Betsy's, but he had left his phone in the truck and wasn't aware of that call. And then Pam seemed to take over all the talking for the interview.
And they let her.
She repeated that Betsy had been afraid of Russ, and she also added now that Russ was a big drinker, who often degraded Betsy and liked to talk about how much money he would get after her death. So we're doubling down on this perpetrator stuff.
Well, Pam also brought up the Thursday before Betsy's death, when she had supposedly written an email to Pam, telling her how afraid she was of her husband, Russ. Now, Pam had not received that email, she said, but she asked the detectives more than once if they would look for that document on Betsy's computer. So let's go over this a second, because this doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
When do you write an email to someone and not send it? Well, it turns out it wasn't in an email software at all. It was in a Word document software. Who does that?
Maybe me, because I'm so illiterate.
But when you're sending an email to someone, you don't type it up in a Word document first.
No, because that would require...
More work.
More work.
And more knowledge, yes.
Even I know that.
Right. So that's really weird. Another thing to put a pin in, I guess.
It is.
But we just have to remember she asked the detectives to look for this.
That's right. It wasn't that they were doing any investigating anyway. They were eased into it or alerted to it by Pam.
Yes, exactly. So by this time, Russ knows he's in trouble.
Yeah, so he hired Joel Schwartz as his defense attorney. And when Schwartz got the police reports and began preparing Russ's defense, he was shocked. His client had an alibi. And Schwartz also wondered why the police weren't looking at Pam Hupp more closely.
So he caught it right away?
Yeah.
Yeah.
After all, Pam is the last person to have seen Betsy alive. And just 5 days before Betsy's murder, Pam had been made the beneficiary of Betsy's life insurance policy. She had also changed her story several times. In small ways, but changing it. And Pam had no alibi. None.
Right. So, yeah, the changes were small, I'll give you that, but they're significant things that you wouldn't really forget.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that to Pam, they probably appeared to be insignificant changes.
Sure. Oh, yeah, I agree with you there. I'm just thinking for the police, they shouldn't be seen as insignificant.
No.
So let's say your friend gets murdered one night, and you've dropped her off at home just an hour or two before she's murdered. Are you going to forget whether or not you walked in the house with her?
No.
No, of course not. It's not like they're asking her years later. They asked her immediately after the murder. So it's all just incredible. But police went ahead. They tested the time it took to drive from Mike Corbin's house, where game night was held, to Russ's house. And the officer was able to get from one house to the other in 23 minutes. But this was with speeding and even passing on the shoulder of the road. Plus, he didn't stop at Arby's. So even if Russ did get home in 23 minutes, he would have had only 9 minutes to kill Betsy, clean up, and call 911. And Russ had not had any blood on his body or his clothing. He was also still wearing the orange t-shirt and jeans that he had had on at game night at Mike Corbin's house, which the friends attested to. But even if you're not going to believe those friends, Russ was seen on the CCTV footage buying gas, cigarettes, dog food, and iced tea in that clothing.
So this is another thing that boggles my mind. They tested. Yes, I can get from one house to the other in 23 minutes by speeding, by not making the stop. So when you look at that, then you say, well, yeah, you still had only 9 minutes. Well, he would have had even 2 minutes if he had driven the speed limit and stopped at Arby's.
If that.
Right?
Yes.
So how could he have done it?
That's the thing. He couldn't have done it. That's the big problem here.
But they didn't look into that.
Nope. Instead of considering that Russ may have actually been innocent or looking at some other suspects, like maybe Pam Hupp, the police and the prosecutor pointed out Russ's errands as actually being suspicious. You know what? He'd filled his gas tank at a different station than where he had purchased the tea and other things. So they theorized that he had gone to 2 different places just to be sure he was seen on camera. Russ bought the cigarettes where he always bought his cigarettes because they were at least 50 cents cheaper there. And he had a reward card for the store where he bought the dog food. Also, these errands had been done prior to 6 p.m. And we know that Betsy was alive at 7:05 p.m. when Pam handed over her phone to Betsy and she'd wished Mark Hupp a happy holiday.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't even matter if he was at those errands.
No.
Because the murder had to have happened after he was at game night.
After 6.
Yes, he was at game night from 6 to 9.
And before 9 or before 9:20.
Yes, exactly.
Well.
So I guess that's why they went with that theory, that the friends had helped. But I just think any educated person, especially someone with experience in law enforcement or the law at all, would say, wait a minute, this isn't making sense. Let's look at some other possibilities.
I would think.
That's all. If you don't want to drop him as a suspect, fine. But look at some other possibilities.
Yeah, but they decided they had their man.
Yes.
But the only real evidence that the prosecution had was the blood found on Russ's slippers that were in the bedroom closet. But his attorney, Schwartz, saw this from the beginning as an attempt to frame Russ for the murder. There were no footprints in the blood from the slippers, as there would have been if he'd been wearing them while killing his wife. Also, there was no spatter on the upper part of the slippers, where there would have been if he wore them while killing her. Because remember, she had been stabbed a total of 55 times, so there was a lot of blood.
There was a lot of blood. But most of the blood had come from her arms and her neck, because we'll find out after autopsy that many of the stab wounds in her body are believed to have been done post-mortem. So in reading Pam's statements that she made in police interviews, Schwartz noticed how Pam had made it sound suspicious and even evil that Russ had told Betsy not to take her purse to chemo with her, and that the house had been dark. Pam had also told them that Russ's car was in the Faria driveway when she dropped off Betsy, and that really couldn't have been true.
No.
Unless, well, I guess if you think the friends are covering all this up and participating.
Well, yeah, there's that.
There is that. But Russ told Schwartz that he never told Betsy not to take her purse with her. In fact, he said he and Betsy had spent Christmas weekend with his parents, with Betsy's sister and Betsy's father, and that Betsy had left her purse at home that entire time. Then Betsy spent Monday night and Tuesday with her mother. And she called Russ on Tuesday before she went home and told him she didn't have her keys with her. This wasn't a big deal to either of them, though, and Russ just told her he'd leave the door unlocked for her.
There. Simple.
Yes, but Pam seems to be trying to make it look bad.
Well, sure.
And what would be her motive for doing that? That's what wasn't really considered, that I think should have been.
Oh, absolutely. So at around 5 o'clock that Tuesday, Betsy spoke with a friend named Rita. And according to Rita, Betsy said right in front of her, "Oh, crap, I left my keys at home. I'm going to have to call Russ and have him leave the door open for me."
So there you go. That backs up Russ's version.
And the other thing about this whole investigation, all Schwartz ended up being given in regards to Russ's polygraph exam was a 1-paragraph summary stating that he had failed. Now, first of all, Russ had been up for over 30 hours when he was given the exam. And second, Russ only remembered someone sitting in front of him and asking questions behind a laptop computer. So Schwartz was wondering if a real polygraph had actually been done. It sounded like what they had done with Russ was a fake, something to try to get a confession from him.
Yeah, which I guess is legal. There is such a thing as giving a suspect a faux polygraph. But it does require disclosure to the defense team. But Schwartz did not get any such notice. He requested audio and video recordings of the polygraph, but then he was told that their video camera had not been working at the time. That's kind of a red flag because they did have video of Russ's initial interviews.
Yeah.
And he was also denied any data from the polygraph.
Russ did offer to take a second polygraph, and his 4 game night alibi witnesses, all of them volunteered to take a polygraph. But investigators declined to test any of these people.
So if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know that I love playing Best Fiends all year round. But this is even more true during the holiday season. It's the perfect little pick-me-up when I need a break from my Hallmark holiday movies, baking, and shopping. So why not stop crushing the same old candy and try a puzzle game with something fresh to offer your brilliant brain?
With Best Fiends, you get an amazing storyline, complete with collectible fiends and tons of fun puzzles. So your fiends start off as little baby versions of their future fiendish selves. The more you play, the more fiends join your team, and the more powerful they become, helping you to solve increasingly challenging puzzles as you progress through the game.
Yeah, Best Fiends is both action-packed and brain-boosting, and with new content added constantly, you'll never get bored. Not to brag, but I am quite far along at level 634, and with literally thousands of levels, I'm never going to run out of gameplay. Even if you're someplace without Wi-Fi, you can play Best Fiends with offline mode. So, even when holiday plans take you off the beaten path, you can still play Best Fiends.
Yeah, playing Best Fiends just fits so well into any lifestyle. You can binge play for hours, or just pick it up for a round or two while waiting in line or chilling out on the couch. Download Best Fiends free today on the App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends.
So Pam Hupp gave a DNA sample to police, but Schwartz was not given any documentation about any DNA comparisons for this. Also, the police did not confirm what Pam had worn the evening of Betsy's murder, and none of her clothing was tested for blood, nor was her car. Part of Pam's changed story was that she had called her husband and Betsy that evening because she was uncertain about finding her way home. This was not viewed as credible by Schwartz, though, because Pam had been to Betsy's house many times. Once was just a week before the murder. So the call to Betsy after Pam left her house that evening really stood out as a red flag to Schwartz. Now, as someone who does get lost going to places I've been to before, I can kind of sympathize that someone might have that issue. But at the same time, why would you call the woman who you just left to get some rest? That was her whole story about getting Betsy home, is Betsy needed her rest.
Right.
So you're going to leave her at home and then start calling her?
And yeah, I know from living with you that sometimes your sense of direction isn't the most keen.
It is really bad, yeah.
But this woman, Pam, had been several times to Betsy's house.
Yeah, she had.
She knew the way.
Yeah, I think she did. Plus she'd said that she made this deliberate effort to get Betsy home to get some rest after chemo. But if that was true and she called Betsy, that doesn't make sense. And also, if you do that, if I say, okay, you did that, when Betsy didn't answer the call, why wouldn't you just think, well, Betsy's sleeping and she doesn't want me to bother her?
Yeah.
And why would you feel concerned and follow up that call by calling Betsy's mother? There was really no reason to be concerned. Although, she is going to say she was worried that Russ was angry at Betsy, and that's what the police would take into their thinking at that point.
Yes.
But remember, on the Friday before Betsy's murder, she and Pam had gone to the library and had that change of beneficiary form signed and witnessed. After that, they'd gone straight to the post office and mailed that form. But Pam didn't tell that to the police. In fact, what she told them was that she didn't know if Betsy had mailed the form yet. But then, on January 17th, after Russ was already arrested, Pam told a State Farm agent that she and Betsy had gone straight from that library to the post office because Betsy had wanted to make certain that the form was postmarked that day. So she's telling a different story to two different people.
Yes, she is. State Farm actually did call a detective who was in charge of the investigation, and he told them that Pam was not a suspect and there was no reason to hold off on paying her Betsy's life insurance claim.
So she really just won them over. I don't know how.
She's an amazing woman.
I don't find her that convincing or likable, but they certainly did.
Yeah. Everything she said was gospel.
So Pam's interviews with police were videotaped. In her interactions with the detectives, she really seemed very forthright and confident. Really confident.
Really confident.
She seemed casual and friendly with them, agreeing with her interviewer as he offered supporting theories on what Russ's motive for killing his wife was. And in one interview, Pam told the detective that her feelings were hurt because Betsy's family had turned on her because she had received the life insurance money. And during this tape, the detective is very sympathetic with Pam, reassuring her that the family was just striking out at her because they were hurt and grieving for Betsy. And for whatever reason, the police seemed to believe everything Pam told them, even after she changed her story more than once.
Yeah, and then when Schwartz looked for Pam Hupp's polygraph results, he learned that while she had agreed to take one, then she hired an attorney who delayed it. Pam's attorney told the police that Pam had had several head injuries in her past. So the police asked her to get a doctor's note clearing her to take the polygraph. So Pam sent a letter to her physician, but she didn't ask for clearance. What she wrote was, "Dear Dr. Fisher, could you please write Detective Kaiser a letter stating that I was not able to do a polygraph due to medical reasons. Don't need any more detail than that."
Well, this Dr. Fisher hadn't seen Pam for several months, but then he saw her in his office on January 3rd, and he wrote a note saying just what she'd asked him to. Pam Hupp is unable to do a polygraph due to her medical condition.
And then down the road, when the doctor was deposed, he told Schwartz she said she didn't think she could do it. Apparently, the police thought that she couldn't do it.
Okay, but they're coming to you for a medical opinion.
Right.
So
It's not a legal opinion. It's a medical opinion.
So it seems like Pam had kind of intimidated this doctor as well.
Yes, and the final thing was when Schwartz did ask the doctor if there's anything about her medical condition that would preclude her from taking a polygraph. The doctor answered that there was nothing that would limit her, in his opinion.
In her own deposition, Pam denied ever writing that note to her doctor. But Schwartz had a copy of the note.
He was supposed to burn it after reading or something.
I guess so. And the note was clearly in Pam's own handwriting. That was verified. And the doctor verified, yes, this is the note that she gave to me. Schwartz questioned Pam about her disability, and she said that she had drop foot and balance problems. What is drop foot?
Well, it's a neurologic disorder where your foot doesn't exactly work the way it should, and it's held in a dependent position to drop foot.
Well, when I worked in nursing and I did some geriatrics work, bedridden people had this thing where their foot was extended out, and I think we called that drop foot. And It was because they never got up and walked or used the foot, and they weren't getting the proper PT.
Yeah. Well, it's a neurologic problem, too.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be from being bedridden. It could just be something that happens neurologically.
Sure.
Okay. She said she tripped at work and hit her head on a filing cabinet in 2009. And she had applied for workers' compensation, and her case was under review. When asked about her head injury, she said that she had no idea what it was. So we've got no documentation for any serious head injury or residual problems due to that. But she did claim to have memory problems.
Yeah, and she said some pretty shocking things in the deposition.
I know.
She said she didn't have health insurance or life insurance on herself. Her husband did have life insurance, however. And she added, amazingly, he's still alive.
Whoa. Whoa.
So when asked to explain that comment, Pam said, amazingly, he's still alive because it's a lot, and I sold it to him. If I wanted a lot of money, I could kill him instead of Betsy.
And that was her argument several times when asked about Betsy's case is, well, why would I kill Betsy? I could have killed this other person who...
Yeah.
She said that a couple times about her mother and her husband.
I know. So Schwartz had learned a lot about Pam by then that made her look guilty. But the police seemed to be pretty unfazed about it, and they were clearly focused on Russ. One other thing that Schwartz discovered was that Pam had been fired from 2 life insurance companies for forging signatures. And there was another thing that bugged him, Schwartz. Pam still refused to take a polygraph.
So Russ went on trial in November. It was November 18th, 2013, close to 2 years after he was arrested. Prosecutor Leah Askey played Russ's 911 call for the jury, and she said that the hysterical call was just part of an elaborate plan to kill Betsy. She called his alibi an intentional conspiracy between Russ and his game night friends. In her opening statement, Askey identified Russ's motive as greed. She described the murder as a crime of passion. But, in fact, most of Betsy's stab wounds were believed to be post-mortem. And this explained why most of the blood had come from her neck and her arm injuries, which were likely done while she was still alive. And it also painted a picture of a methodical crime set up to look like a crime of passion. But Askey brought in witnesses throughout her case who gave examples of times when Russ was not the ideal husband. He smoked marijuana, he lost his temper, he swore, he could be crude, and he was in debt. All things that made him a murderer?
Yeah.
I don't know. Most of the people I know have these things going on. It's very odd, very odd. So witnesses also testified that Russ had believed that he was still the beneficiary on Betsy's life insurance policy for $150,000. Russ's 2 stepdaughters, Betsy's daughters, were convinced by this time that Russ was guilty. So they testified that Russ and their mother fought a lot and that he just wasn't such a great guy. So they testified against him as well.
Yeah, Russ has lost everyone.
Well, not everyone.
His family's still there.
Yes. And his game night friends know he's innocent because they were there.
Well, they're all lying for him anyway.
Well, if that's the case, then that's true.
Now, the prosecutor's questions to her witnesses advanced the scenario that someone had killed Betsy, then showered and cleaned up and put the dog outside. And the supporting testimony suggested that Russ would be the only one who could handle the dog and the only one who knew where to find the towels. Well, how many places you got to look for towels?
Well, yeah, it's usually in the linen closet, somewhere near the bathroom. And if she had actually gone into the house with Betsy, it would have been Betsy who let the dog out.
Yeah. And Askey described for the jury a paw print that had been found on Betsy's body. But a crime scene investigator countered that the splotch really couldn't be identified as a paw print.
When police officers testified, they said that a Blue Star test for the presence of blood had shown a path of cleaned up blood in the house, but that their camera had not worked properly, so they'd been unable to get the photos developed. Testing had not confirmed that there was any blood on the kitchen floor or in the towel drawer or in the shower or sink drains. So if Russ had showered after killing his wife, like the prosecutor was saying, there should have been some water and blood in the drain. We hear this all the time. They go into the plumbing and they can find traces of blood if someone has cleaned up a crime scene and taken a shower.
Mm-hmm.
But there was nothing present and there was no water there either. So there was really a complete lack of any physical evidence against Russ, unless you think of maybe the slippers. The slippers were considered the prosecution's best piece of evidence, but they had not left any bloody prints in any part of the house. And nothing matched the pattern of the soles of those slippers on the floor. There was a smudge of Betsy's blood on a light switch, but no fingerprint was identified, and forensic investigators actually believed it had been a fabric pattern, like it had been done with a piece of cloth or clothing.
And Betsy's daughter Leah had called her mother's phone on the evening of the murder at 7:21, 7:26, and 7:30. She was calling to get Betsy to authorize U.S. cellular charges for her over the phone, but Betsy didn't answer. So this led Schwartz to believe that Betsy had been killed before 7:21 p.m., which would explain the rigor mortis and coolness of Betsy's body.
And remember, Pam had dropped Betsy off around 7.
Yep.
And Russ had been at game night from 6 to 9, unless you're believing the conspiracy theory. So to counter this, the prosecutor questioned the medical examiner who had done Betsy's autopsy, and she asked him about something called cadaveric spasm.
Yeah, this is something that causes immediate rigor if the death followed intense physical activity. The medical examiner testified that cadaveric spasm is very rare and not universally accepted, but that it was a possibility. Well, I'd never heard of that. And not that I know everything about medicine, but I just never heard of cadaveric spasm. I found out it's also called postmortem spasm, instantaneous rigor, cataleptic rigidity, and instantaneous rigidity. And it's supposed to be a rare form of muscular stiffening that occurs at the moment of death and persists into the rigor mortis stiffening.
Well, we've covered like 400 murders, and I've never heard of it. So it has to be very rare if it exists.
Well, there's a couple of sources I think you have in the footnotes.
I do, yes.
There is no scientific basis to support the validity of cadaveric spasm.
Okay.
So I think
that's
it's
very thin
hyperbole.
evidence of anything, yeah.
Right. Then the prosecutor also brought up the fact that there were 8 sperm cells found in Betsy's vagina, concluding that this meant Russ had sexually assaulted Betsy before stabbing her to death. But a forensic investigator testified that after intercourse, there are hundreds of sperm that can remain for up to 3 days. And Russ had said that he and Betsy had intercourse on Sunday, 2 days before Betsy was killed. So there could be some little critters floating around in there.
Well, 8 is nothing. 8 is a very small amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Schwartz also brought in an expert in forensic computer science to testify about Russ's cell phone mapping on the night of the murder. What's remarkable is that the police and the prosecution had not investigated this crucial evidence.
Yes, that's terrible. That's very negligent.
And the expert testified that Russ's phone was still at least 10 miles away from his house at 9:25 p.m., and it reached his house at 9:37. And at 9:40, Russ had called 911. So that scenario fits perfectly well.
It really does.
You get home, walk in, there's your dead wife.
It does make sense. A lot more sense than the other things I'm hearing.
Way more.
So Schwartz wanted to present evidence of the locations of Pam's cell phone that evening, but he wasn't allowed to by the judge. He was also not allowed to mention Pam's motive as the life insurance beneficiary. And this was all because the judge concluded that Pam Hupp had no direct connection to the murder case. Now, I'm no lawyer, but how many cases have we followed? And this kind of thing is almost always let in. If you have an alternate suspect and there are some suspicious things, of course you would bring that up to defend your client. So it just seems really odd that that wasn't allowed. Really odd.
Yeah. Well, the judge said Pam had no direct connection to the murder case, so...
How can that be? She was the last one to see her alive. It baffles me.
It does.
So Schwartz did try to cross-examine Pam when she testified for the prosecution, pointing out inconsistencies in her story. But the prosecutor objected because he was impeaching the witness, and her objection was sustained. Now, it was my understanding that it is the job of the defense attorney on cross-examination to impeach the witness. But...
Yeah, I was just wondering that same thing. Isn't that the goal?
That is the goal. But Schwartz did get to question Pam about why she had told police at first that she hadn't gone into Betsy's house, but then later said that she had. Her answer was really nonsensical. She said that she had not planned to go inside, but then she turned around and went inside anyway. Okay.
Sure.
Explains nothing.
Days before her testimony, Pam put $100,000 in a trust for Betsy's daughters. I would think that this should have been a long time before testimony. It's almost like, oh, geez, I'm going to go to court and testify. I better get that money in a trust.
Oh, but it is like that. She was actually told by the police that it doesn't look good to not have put that money somewhere for the daughters.
Well, and then she also claimed to be using the other $50,000 to help another 12-year-old girl whose mother had died from breast cancer. But it would turn out that she is not helping any 12-year-old. And
shocking.
And she would later admit to lying about that whenever anyone would bug her about it.
Yeah, just to get him off her back.
But the jury didn't hear about this.
No, they didn't. So Prosecutor Askey's closing argument was really interesting. This is when she went over her theory of the crime. She said that Russ had decided that the murder of Betsy would be his ultimate role-play game. So she said that months or even years before, Russ had the idea to kill Betsy for money, and he had shared this idea with his game night friends. Then, when Betsy texted him telling him that Pam was taking her home that night, Russ decided that this would be the night. So Askey told the jury Russ made all of those stops to establish an alibi. He left his phone with his friends and drove home. Betsy was home on the couch, so Russ went and had sex with her, violating her and controlling her one last time. Her reasoning for why Russ's clothes had no blood on them was that he actually killed his wife and cleaned up in the nude and showered afterward. When he realized that his slippers had blood on them, he tossed them in the closet. And in the meantime, one of his game night friends brought his cell phone to him along with the Arby's receipt and put the Arby's sandwich wrappers in his car too. Incriminating Russ's law-abiding game night friends with no evidence whatsoever is one of the most ludicrous things about this case. But the closing argument is not testimony, and it was allowed.
Yeah, like you said, it baffles the mind.
It does.
So in his closing argument, Schwartz went over Askey's theory and the details of the forensics, the timeline, and Russ's alibi. He described the murder as designed to look like rage. The stab wounds were methodical, he said, neatly angled, as if done after death.
Which I think you probably would be able to tell if someone's struggling or if they're lying still when they're being stabbed.
Right. Well, and you can also tell if you're dead.
Yes.
There's no blood flow.
Right, exactly.
So you're not going to have a lot of blood coming out of the stab wounds.
Exactly, yes.
Which is what they found.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Just to continue with the far-fetched story, the jury returned with a guilty verdict in just 4.5 hours. When the judge asked Schwartz if he wanted to set a sentencing date, Schwartz responded, "You mean a date for a new trial?"
He was livid, and I don't blame him. How frustrating could that be?
And then in post-trial interviews, jurors told the media that they found Russ's alibi to be too pat and that his friends' stories were too similar. Well, of course they're similar. They'd all spent the evening together.
Yeah, it wasn't complicated. They'd been watching movies and smoking weed, and they all had the same story. But in the jury's defense, they didn't hear most of the stuff about Pam, so they really didn't have an alternate suspect.
No, that's
Although
true.
I still think they were very wrong in their conclusions, but they didn't have all the information that we have, or that the prosecutor had. So away from the jury, Pam had made so many incriminating statements. When Schwartz had asked her why it had taken her years to set up the trust for Betsy's daughters, Pam told him that she had been busy taking care of her mother, and she said her mother had died of Alzheimer's on October 31st. Now, it didn't even occur to him that Pam would have been lying to him about that, but she was. After the trial had ended, Schwartz learned that Pam's mother, Shirley Newman, had not died of Alzheimer's or any disease at all for that matter. Shirley did have some mild dementia, but she died in a fall from the balcony of her third-floor retirement community apartment.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is big news. And the police took photos of the balcony. 2 metal rails were on the ground with her body, like the spindle part, and 4 other spindles were bent outward. So this had created an opening of about 3 square feet. But it was low. The top railing was intact and very sturdy. Also, Shirley was found to have 8 times the normal dose of Ambien in her system. So Shirley had spent the night of October 29th with Pam at Pam's house. Pam took her to the hospital for back pain on the 30th, then brought her mother back to the retirement home. According to the retirement community manager, Pam brought Shirley home around 5 p.m. She then told the staff that her mother would not be coming to the communal dinner that night or to breakfast the next morning. So it was after lunch the next day on the 31st when a housekeeper went to Shirley's apartment to check on her, and she found the apartment door open a crack and there was water running in the bathroom. The patio door leading out to the balcony was wide open. So the housekeeper looked over the railing and saw Shirley's body down in the grass below. She was wearing her pajamas. So could she have taken too much Ambien and fallen? That seemed possible. But then why would she fall so low through those rails and not over the top of the rail? It was suspicious. But I guess police just looked at this briefly and determined it was an accident.
You know, the way it's pictured, the mother would almost have to have gone forward and dove through that opening.
Yes.
She didn't go over the top.
No, she went through below waist level.
Yeah. So that just sounds really weird right there. And you'll find some more stuff when you present some other evidence.
Yes. My boyfriend Keith actually shared a lot of that on Dateline, and we'll share that when we get to that point.
Yeah, we will. So nearly 2 years earlier, Pam had told the detectives investigating Betsy's murder that if she wanted money, her mom was worth $500,000, and that would be an easier way, she had said.
So this goes back to the way she talked about her husband. It would have been easier to kill my husband. My husband would have left me more money. And here she was actually saying it would have been easier to kill my mother because Betsy was stronger and would fight me more.
Yeah.
And it would have been a lot easier and I'd get more money if it was my mom.
Mm-hmm.
To me, this is not a good way to explain that you didn't kill someone by saying, or these other people I could have killed to get more money.
Right.
And she said other strange things to detectives about money. When asked about the insurance money from Betsy's death, she told them that Betsy was dying, and if it worked out that she got the money, great. $150,000 when you're not expecting it is pretty damn nice, she said. So I'm paraphrasing a lot of that, but this makes me think about when you listen to Pam or read anything, she really kind of acted like a wealthy woman, even though she certainly wasn't. She acted like she was above it all. But she was not a wealthy woman at all. But she had this way of acting very kind of snooty.
She presented herself.
Absolutely she did. She didn't look like it.
No.
It's just the way she spoke. Pam did acknowledge that that type of talk may have sounded morbid, but she said, I'm a finance person. Whatever the fuck that means. She did not have a job in finance or anything, so...
Well, in her mind, she did.
Yeah. And then in another interview, she said, well, $150,000 is not that much money in my world. When asked about depositing $134,000 into her account after she got Betsy's insurance payout, she got really angry. And she said she could have gotten that money for that deposit anywhere. Very strange woman.
Very. Now, when asked by investigative reporter Chris Hayes of Fox 2 about her mother's death, Pam seemed just more than happy to talk. She spoke with Hayes for over 30 minutes. She said that the people at the retirement community were saying it was a suicide, but she really didn't know what was happening.
No one said it was a suicide, by the way.
Thank you. Dateline NBC, who would go on to do, count 'em, 5 separate episodes and a podcast about Pam Hupp, had a structural engineer look at the balcony railing spindles. He concluded that it would take a lawnmower or a vehicle to cause that much bending of the metal. Shirley was a 210-pound woman. Falling headfirst into the spindles would only exert about 400 pounds of force, which was nowhere near enough. So what, did Pam bend the spindles and dislodge them? And if so, how? And it probably took some work.
Some planning.
Yeah. Shirley had no marks on her from hitting the metal spindles also.
And she would have had to hit them really hard, and they would have had to already be damaged or dislodged in some way for her to even do that. So the whole thing's very, very odd and suspicious.
Yeah.
In the experiments that they did with a structural engineer on Dateline, over 800 pounds of weight did not even bend those spindles. And the engineer said this was no accident. Then, in 2017, Shirley's cause of death would be changed from accidental to undetermined. The police got an anonymous tip that they should look at Pam in connection to her mother's death, but they didn't even interview Pam about it. They did call her brother, who said he had no suspicions about the death, and then they pretty much dropped it.
That's that.
Why did they not ask Pam? That's a big question in my mind. Were they so friendly with her that they didn't want to insult her by asking?
Oh, and these weren't the same police officers that were investigating Betsy's death, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. So that couldn't be it. Very strange.
Very strange. In July of 2014, Pam gave a deposition for a civil trial where Betsy's daughters were suing her for Betsy's life insurance money. Pam had set up that trust for the daughters with $100,000 of the money just days before Russ's criminal trial. This turned out to be at the suggestion of a detective. Are you kidding me?
No.
Who prepared her for her testimony.
It's on videotape. He's telling her, there's kind of a problem with the fact that you haven't given any of the money to the daughters. It's not going to look good. So she went out and did this just days before the criminal trial.
And then right after the trial, she dissolved the trust and took the money back.
She did.
It's almost laughable.
It takes some big cojones to do something like that. It's really nervy.
In this deposition, Pam was asked if Betsy had mentioned to her that she wanted the money to be used for her daughters. Pam answered absolutely not. Back in 2012, Pam told the detective that Betsy had been afraid that the girls would blow all the money if they got it right away. So she was planning to have certain criteria for their spending in order to honor Betsy.
Oh, that's such bullshit.
And that's when she was told that she needed to set up a trust for the girls for their sake and for the sake of appearances, which she did. But like you said, it was just a few days before the trial.
Yeah, and then she disbanded it just as quickly.
Yeah.
Also, Pam and her husband Mark had purchased a 4-bedroom house in O'Fallon, but Pam said she didn't use any of Betsy's life insurance payout for that purchase. And then she said, well, the trust money is gone, though. She admitted that. And she said, it's an irrevocable trust, so I just revoked it.
Duh.
Which is really pretty awful.
So
and
when
she's taking this woman's money from her own daughters.
Yeah, that she did.
Plus, Russ is in prison, so it's not like he can help the daughters either. It's an evil, selfish person. So when Schwartz heard about Pam using that trust money, he wrote out something that's called a Mooney motion. And this motion told the court that there was new evidence for a judge to consider that might invalidate Russ's guilty verdict. So according to Schwartz, a Mooney motion has only been granted 3 times before in the state of Missouri, but his became number 4. It was successful.
A very rare event.
Yes.
So in February of 2015, Russ was awarded a new trial. In Russ's first trial, a police officer had testified that the pictures would not develop, but that the Blue Star analysis had shown a trail of cleaned-up blood in the house. But before the second trial started, Schwartz had been sent a CD from the prosecutor's office with 132 crime scene photos that he had not seen before. These were dark, and they did not show a glowing path in the house. So, despite what the prosecution said, once the photos were developed, they didn't show any trail of blood.
And they were developed.
Yeah.
Yeah. A new video of an interview with Pam surfaced that June. And in this video, Pam said that she and Betsy had a sexual affair. So this was just shocking and new.
Yeah, it's almost like this is out of the blue.
Yeah. And she said that neither of them were lesbians, but trauma had made Betsy open to being lovers with Pam. She said that she had replaced what a husband would be for Betsy. So the whole way she says this is very bizarre. She comments that she really loves men and she can't wait for Magic Mike XXL to come out. But that this was a small thing that she gave to Betsy because Betsy needed it. Now it was odd that these interviews, which seemed more like 2 friends gossiping than a police officer interviewing a witness, had even been recorded. And it really seemed like the prosecutor and the detectives liked Pam and they were treating her like a friend. So encouraging her, Detective Mike Merkel said, "Well, Pam, that's the problem solver in you. You knew what would help her. You were there for her in every aspect." Puke.
Yeah.
That just makes me want to vomit. And this was an explanation for why Betsy made Pam her beneficiary. And also it added another motive for Russ being Betsy's killer, because Pam went on to accuse Russ of threatening her and calling her a muff bumper. She even said that he had pushed her up against a wall and threatened to bury her in the backyard. She said that she was afraid of Russ and that Betsy had actually planned to tell Russ that she was leaving him on the night she was killed. And this is all news. This is nothing that she ever mentioned in earlier interviews with police. This is years after the murder she's coming out with this stuff, which should make it not credible.
Well, it should. Now then Pam came to the police with even more news. She had recovered a memory. Hallelujah. She had actually seen Russ at the crime scene that night.
That's a big one.
Yeah, because back in 2012, Pam had told the police that she didn't see Russ on the evening of the murder. Then in 2015, a detective told Pam that they thought Russ may have been at home while Pam was still there at the house. And they worded it to her this way. This is what we've discussed amongst ourselves. Is any part of that correct? Did you see Russ that night? Now at that point, Pam had said no. But then months later, she said that she remembered seeing a car that night parked near Betsy's house. There were 2 men inside, she said, and one of them was Russ. She went on to describe one of the men ducking down as she drove past him to go home. And she no longer remembered seeing Russ's silver Nissan in their driveway. It had been Betsy's SUV in the driveway, she said. And this made it so that the car parked nearby could have been Russ's Nissan. Pam said that she had severe head injuries from 3 car accidents, and that, along with the use of Ambien, made her lose her memory and then regain memories. The more I talk about it, the clearer it gets, Pam added.
Oh my God. The more I say this thing that isn't true, the clearer it seems and the more real it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. So in 2016, when Betsy's daughter's civil suit went to trial, Pam had blamed a poor memory for her inconsistencies. Although it was acknowledged by her own attorney that she was not credible, Pam was allowed to keep all of the insurance money because all of the paperwork was correct. Her lawyer pointed out that Betsy knew how insurance worked and that if she had wanted her daughters to get her life insurance payout, she would have put them down as the beneficiaries. So that's something that I've had to give some thought to, because it's certainly true that Betsy did know how that worked, but I feel like there's something Pam told Betsy to get her to do that, in some way lured her or tricked her.
I think so.
Maybe it was that your daughters will just blow all the money, or maybe Betsy didn't even know what she was signing. Who knows? Pam could have given Betsy medication to make her not quite as sharp as she normally would be as well.
Could have done that. Again, remember, this lady has terminal cancer. She's probably on medication.
Mm-hmm. She is, and she probably was relying on Pam, thinking that she was a trustworthy person.
Yeah.
So that's really sad to think about.
Then 2 weeks before Russ's second trial, a forensic computer expert located the document that Pam had told police to look for on Betsy's laptop. Schwartz's hired expert determined that it was the only document in Betsy's computer that had the author saved as unknown. Also, the text was from Microsoft Word 97, and this software was not installed on Betsy's computer at all. So the letter was most likely written on another computer and then transferred onto Betsy's laptop.
Yes, and many people who knew Betsy well didn't think the wording was anything like Betsy's.
Yeah.
And she wasn't one to really use Word in personal correspondence. Schwartz requested a bench trial for Russ's second trial, and prosecutor Askey again asked the judge to exclude any evidence of an alternate suspect, but this time she was denied and the evidence against Pam was allowed in. Schwartz was able to question detectives about Pam's changing stories, but they still held to Russ as the only suspect in Betsy's murder. A crime scene investigator testified that Russ's slippers didn't look like they had stepped in blood, but looked more like they'd been dipped in blood. She also said there was no evidence of a cleanup at all. The floor was actually still dirty, and the shower and drain had no water and blood in them, as I said before. The document supposedly written by Betsy to Pam, but never emailed, talked about her life insurance. In part it read, "Do you think I can put it in your name? And I'm afraid of staying alone with Russ. And if something happens to me, please show this to the police." So the letter was written 1 day before Betsy signed her life insurance change of beneficiary form. And when Betsy's good friend Rita heard this, she said that Betsy would not word things so formally, and she wouldn't type up a letter. If she had really felt those things, Betsy would have called a close friend like her. Not Pam, she said. Pam had been waiting to take the stand, but neither the prosecutor or the defense attorney called her this time. So Pam had left for home before the verdict came in, acquitting Russ and setting him free. And this judge called the investigation rather disturbing.
Yes. Now, even after this acquittal, prosecutor Askey had no intention of charging anyone else with the murder. So Schwartz called the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Missouri and asked for a review of the case. He knew that Russ was innocent, and he believed that if the case was allowed to go cold, someone else might die.
Wow. It's amazing that he said that, because he was right.
Mm-hmm. On August 16th, 2016, Pamela Hupp shot a man to death in her own home. The man she killed was a guy named Louis Gumpenberger. Pam called the police and said that he had tried to assault her, demanding Russ's money, so she had shot him in self-defense. She said he was yelling he would kill her, so she ran to the bathroom, got her gun, and emptied the revolver into this 33-year-old man.
So Louis was actually in a drunk driving crash back in 2005 where he sustained severe damage to his skull and had brain damage. So he also had a limp and his left hand didn't work at all. He was very soft-spoken and he was unable to process complex thoughts. Louis had 2 children whom he adored, and he worked a job at a manufacturing facility which employed disabled adults. He was described by people there as a friendly, happy guy. About 45 minutes before Pam called 911 to tell them she had shot an attacker, her phone had pinged in Louis's neighborhood. And her story was that she had been shopping and had stopped at her daughter's house, which was about 2 miles away from Louis's apartment. But Pam said her daughter was not home, so she drove about 14 miles back to her house to let her dog out. But as Pam took care of her dog, she saw a man in a silver 4-door car speed away. And remember, Russ owned a 4-door silver Nissan.
Mm-hmm.
So the St. Charles County Prosecutor's Office and the O'Fallon Police would put together a theory about what had actually happened between Pam and Louis Gumpenberger. Pam had lured Louis to her house, they believed, by telling him that she was a producer from Dateline NBC. She offered him money to reenact a 911 call for the show. Then she shot him to death in order to point suspicions back at Russ Faria for Betsy's murder. They believed that she did this because the police began looking at her more closely in Betsy's case.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
So at this point in time, Dateline had already produced and aired 2 episodes about this case, and they were working on a 3rd. In mid-July, Russ had filed a civil suit against the Lincoln County prosecutor, as well as the detectives who had investigated Betsy's murder. In this suit, Russ alleged that they had fabricated evidence and ignored the actual exonerating evidence. Also, they had not investigated the obvious suspect, Pam Hupp.
Well, that's concise description. That's correct. So the killing of Louis Gumpenberger ended up being solved primarily because of a police report filed 6 days before his shooting. A woman in St. Charles County had filed this report after being approached by a blonde woman in an SUV. This was in the late morning, and the woman pulled up to a woman who lived in a trailer park community. The woman in the SUV introduced herself as Dateline producer Kathy Singer and offered the woman $1,000 to reenact a 911 call for the show. But the so-called producer had no camera crew with her, and she had no Dateline credentials with her. So this woman agreed at first to do it, but then she got a bad feeling and changed her mind. And there was footage from a home security camera that showed Pam Hupp's gray GMC Acadia, with the license plate clearly legible.
So Pam had claimed that Louis Gumpenberger was an intruder who followed her in her SUV, jumped into her vehicle, held a knife to her throat, and demanded that she drive them both to the bank. She told investigators that when she hit the knife out of his hand and ran inside her house, he followed her. She called 911 and reported a burglary in progress, and then she would call again to report the shooting. In Louis's pockets, police found $900 in cash, double-bagged in plastic, and a handwritten note with instructions to kidnap Pam Hupp, drive her to the bank, to get Russ's money, leave that money in the wood pile at Russ's house, then kill her to collect the balance of a $10,000 payment that had been promised to him for killing Pam. The $900 on Louis, though, had serial numbers that lined up in sequence with another $100 bill in Pam's bedside table. And investigators later discovered that Pam had purchased the knife herself and wrote the note on paper, which she had also purchased.
Looks like Pam's becoming unraveled a little bit.
Finally caught.
Or that she's not as smart as she thinks she is.
Yes.
So when police interviewed Russ, this statement about the woodpile seemed kind of odd to him. But then he remembered that his father had some landscaping wood in the front yard. So he wondered if Pam had driven by his house and seen it before writing the note. And he checked with a neighbor who had a security camera out in front of his house, and this neighbor caught Pam's SUV on his footage. It was her GMC Acadia, the same exact car she had used to pick up Louis Gumpenberger. So when police arrived at Pam's house, they recognized her as the Pam Hupp that had been in the news in relation to Betsy Faria's case. Inside of the door leading from the garage into the house, they saw Louis's body. He had been shot 5 times. Now, there were some red flags at the scene. There's a lack of any signs of a struggle, and they noticed that a swatch of carpet had been cut out that was directly beneath Louis's body. The piece of carpet looked like it had been purposely put there to protect Pam's good carpet from the blood. Jeez.
I hate to laugh because I think it's tragic that this man was killed, but that's more than a red flag.
It sure is.
Really? You're going to put extra carpet there to protect your carpet? Is that how much you think of a human being's life? Oh my God. Well, that's more than odd.
Yeah.
After the shooting, Pam was taken to the police station and interviewed, and she was videotaped as she sat in an interrogation room. She was wearing her usual casual clothing and sneakers. One of the investigators asked her about her activities that morning. She said she'd showered, walked her dog, put gas in her car, and bought herself a soda. Her demeanor was really odd for someone who had been violently attacked and had just killed a man in her home, because she was her usual casual, matter-of-fact Pam. Pam said that she let her dog out when she got home and then got back into her car to go to Best Buy. As she started to back out of her driveway, she said, that's when she saw a car driving fast down across the street, and it stopped right in front of her driveway. Driving fast down the cross street, and it stopped right in front of her driveway. She said then Lewis jumped in her car with a knife and yelled at her to take him to the bank to get Russ's money. The speeding car had dropped off her attacker, and Pam had seen the man driving the car. And guess how she described him? A lot like you might describe Russ Faria. Short dark hair, possibly Hispanic, kind of chubby.
Could be Russ.
Well, it certainly seemed like she was describing Russ as the driver of the vehicle. But then Pam said she escaped Lewis, ran into her house, and she was in her bedroom with her gun. Lewis chased her, and she called 911 while he tried to knock her bedroom door in. Then Pam said she advanced on the man, pulled the trigger until she heard click, click, so emptied the gun into him.
This scenario sounded rather scripted to the St. Charles County detectives. Investigators wanted to hear Pam's interpretation of why this had happened. So they acted as if they weren't familiar with the Betsy Faria case and Pam's involvement as a key witness against Russ. So they asked her to go over everything with them. So she did, and she described the incident as a revenge plot organized by Russ to get Betsy's insurance money.
So I don't know if these police detectives are smarter or if they're just more open-minded. I don't know. But they weren't buying it.
Well, it's a kind of a preposterous story.
Yeah, but I would also say that Betsy's murder is a preposterous story if you think that her husband did it.
When you know the whole story, sure.
Yeah. Well, after the police identified Lewis, they had to go and inform his poor mother about his death. And when speaking with her, they learned that Lewis was disabled. He didn't have the mental capacity to participate in a murder-for-hire plot. And he wasn't physically able to even run. His disabilities made it nearly impossible for him to have done what Pam claimed he had done. And the evidence didn't match what Pam Hupp had been saying happened either. So at the end of her interview that day, Pam made an error that would really do her in. She said she'd called 911 from her cell phone. So the detective asked her for her phone so it could be searched. And she agreed and handed over her phone. So the police then took Pam's phone to the cyber crime lab where it was processed as evidence. And they found out some stuff.
Oh, yes. So nothing about the attempted break-in and shooting made sense. In Pam's first call to 911, she says that someone is breaking into her house, and Lewis's voice can be heard in the background, as if he's reading from a script. It sounds like a bad amateur theater performance. Also, there is complete silence in the background, no sounds of a struggle at all.
So that's pretty heartbreaking when you think of this guy trying to read this script she gave him, thinking it's for TV and that he's going to earn $1,000. He's probably excited. He doesn't make a lot of money. He's thinking, I can get this money for my family. It's really heartbreaking, and this woman had no thoughts at all for anyone else's feelings. Not 1 ounce of compassion. So, when a person calls 911, the caller is actually being recorded even before the dispatcher picks up the call. And in this case, there's complete silence on the line until after the dispatcher picks up and speaks. Like they're waiting for her to answer, and then she's going to start her act.
Mm-hmm.
Police met with Russ, and they had him write out the note that had been found on Lewis several times, and the note was sent to a handwriting analyst who determined that the note Lewis had in his pocket had definitely not been written by Russ Faria.
So Pam's phone would turn out to be a real goldmine of information. Her phone was synced to a Gmail account, and the location service history was on. So her entire location history is on her phone. So her phone pinged in the area of Lewis's apartment complex on the day that she killed him. And it turned out, as they looked more into her phone records, that Pam had been trolling for victims in low-income neighborhoods for weeks. Police put together a map of her location in the days leading up to, as well as the day of, the shooting. And then using Google Earth, the investigators could see pins for where she had been. On the day of the shooting, there was a pin at Lewis's apartment complex. Pam had been at that location for 3 to 5 minutes, and then she'd gone straight to her house.
So Pam's location information was used by teams of investigators to go out and look for any CCTV footage of Pam. And they ended up getting a lot of footage of her. Video from a bakery near Pam's house showed Pam in her SUV with Louis Gumpenberger in her passenger seat. After connecting Pam with Louis, the police needed to find out how she had lured him to go with her. And this is when they got the tip to talk to Carol Alfred. She was the woman who had been approached in front of her trailer home by the blonde claiming to be a Dateline producer back on August 10th, just 6 days before Louis was killed. So Carol had been at home taking out her dog when Pam had showed up. Carol said that Pam had a weird smile on her face as she sat out front of Carol's trailer. Carol's beagle growled at the woman. Then Pam asked Carol, "Hey, do you babysit?" Which seemed like a really weird thing to ask a stranger.
Yes, it would be.
So Carol did not suffer fools, and she was suspicious, but she was a bit curious as well. Pam asked her if she knew what a soundbite is. Then she said that she was a producer from Dateline and her name was Kathy. She said that the show was reenacting 911 calls and they had rented out a trailer in the park. This Kathy offered Carol $1,000 up front and then another $1,000 when they finished. Dateline has made it very clear they don't reenact 911 calls and they don't pay people for interviews. Carol felt sure that this Kathy person was lying to her, but she wondered what this weird woman was up to. Carol had the woman pull up into her driveway where she could be seen on her security camera, and the camera recorded Pam's license plate number. Carol put her dog inside her home and put a pocket knife up one of her sleeves. In her front pocket, she had her cell phone and a kitchen knife. Carol did get into Pam's car and asked her to show her an ID, and Pam said she would show her when they got to a house near the mall. Not the trailer home she had just said minutes before they had rented for the show. This, of course, set off more alarms in Carol's mind.
Fortunately.
Yes. She talked Pam into taking her back home, saying she'd forgotten to lock her door. But then when she got inside, she called the police and told them the whole story. Otherwise, Carol probably would have been killed.
Oh, I think so.
So Carol went into the police station and she was shown 6 pictures to see if she could ID Pam. And Carol realized she'd made a really narrow escape, because if she'd believed Pam, she'd be the dead one instead of Louis Gumpenberger. The police then had a press conference where they spelled out the details of this case. They said that they had reason to believe that Pam had posed as a Dateline producer in order to get Louis to go with her in her car.
But once police had put together their evidence against Pam, she was arrested for the murder of Louis Gumpenberger. And on August 23, 2016, in the car on the way to the police station, Pam seemed calm and composed. And at the O'Fallon Police Department, she was taken into an interrogation room for an interview. This was videotaped. She was read her Miranda rights and she requested an attorney. So alone in the room, as the police contacted her lawyer, Pam sat quietly. She was at a table which had a water bottle, reading glasses, and a pen on it. So she sneakily put her hand over the pen and slipped it into the back of the waistband of her pants. Then when an officer returned, she asked to use the bathroom. In the bathroom, she used the pen to stab her neck and her wrists. This was interpreted as a suicide attempt and as a consciousness of guilt.
So in December, a grand jury indicted Pam on the murder charge for Louis's death, and she pleaded not guilty in January of 2017. Then in March, the prosecutor's office announced that they would seek the death penalty for Pam because of her random choice of Louis Gumpenberger as her victim. In May 2018, it was ruled that the prosecutors would not be allowed to present evidence related to the death of Pam's mother, Shirley Newman. But 1 month later, it was ruled that prosecutors could present evidence related to Betsy's murder. And Pam's trial was scheduled to begin in June 2019. In 2018, prosecutor Leah Askey and the judge involved in the conviction of Russ Faria were voted out of office. The new prosecutor's campaign was very focused on the botched investigation and the wrongful conviction of Russ.
So Pam entered an Alford plea, allowing her to avoid a death penalty trial without admitting guilt in the case. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole in August of 2019. Apparently, she told her husband that she took the plea to save her family of having to go through an ugly trial. It was nice of her.
In October 2019, Louis Gumpenberger's mother filed a wrongful death suit against Pam, and she was eventually awarded a $3 million judgment, and her attorney has garnished Pam's prison account. Of course, she'll never get close to $3 million. Pam's husband Mark filed for divorce from Pam in September of 2020, and Pam already filed to vacate her conviction, claiming that she was pressured to take the Alford plea. This was denied. This past July, Pam was charged with first-degree murder and criminal action for Betsy's 2011 murder. According to court documents obtained by Dateline, Pam Hupp tracked Betsy's whereabouts on Tuesday, December 27, 2011, waiting until she was weak and tired from chemotherapy that day, and gave her a ride home, knowing that Betsy's husband, Russ, would be at game night. The way Pam stabbed herself in the neck and wrists is disturbingly similar to the way Betsy was killed, too. The prosecutor is seeking the death penalty for Pam. Aggravating factors are that she murdered for insurance money, not only killing her friend, but mutilating Betsy's body, staging the scene, and testifying against an innocent man. 4 days before the murder, Betsy had made Pam the beneficiary of her $150,000 life insurance policy in place of her husband, and this was a change which Betsy's other friends and family, including Russ, knew nothing about.
According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, prosecutors dropped a charge of armed criminal action against Pam. Her murder trial is expected to happen in 2022. She has not been charged in her mother's death. In the meantime, her crimes are certainly getting a lot of attention in the media. Aside from the many Dateline episodes, filmmaker Daniel Blake Smith is writing and producing a film titled Proof, based on Russ Faria's wrongful conviction and the story of his defense attorney, Joel Schwartz.
He's become a bit of a hero.
He certainly has. He didn't quit on him.
He didn't. And he's cute, so that doesn't hurt.
I see. Yeah, because they're also planning a 6-episode series titled The Thing About Pam. It's now in production, so it's for NBC. It's starring Renee Zellweger as Pam and Josh Duhamel as Joel Schwartz. You got a little hottie portraying him, too.
Yeah, that's true. So we are planning on following up on this case, right? We're going to follow it because there's still a lot to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
So I hope we'll have an update on this sometime next year after her trial for Betsy's murder. Because it is, really, such a detailed case, so many twists and turns, and just really, it's stranger than fiction.
We say
really
that all
is.
the time, but I was just, after golf yesterday, my golfing buddies who follow your podcast very avidly wanted to know what the next case was. So I was telling them just a little bit about this one.
Yeah.
And they were just going, oh, I can't believe that.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're not like a big true crime person and you haven't heard of this before, you're really going to have a hard time believing that we're not making stuff up. But this is true. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more about it in the future. But for now, I think we better wrap it up. It's been 2 hours of talking. We're going to forego feedback today and save that for next week.
I'll have some.
But before leaving for the day, I just want to remind everyone that TCB's music is written and produced by Tristan Capel, And if you have comments, case suggestions, or beer recommendations, you can always email us at truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. Or better yet, you can record a voicemail from any device by clicking on the link in our show notes or going to our website and clicking on Leave a Voicemail. If you are interested in getting your future TCB episodes commercial-free or just want to give some support to our show and then enjoy those benefits as an afterthought, we'd really appreciate you becoming a Tie Grabber. What you do is go to our website and sign up. You'll get access to an extra members-only episode each month. No more ads in any of the episodes that you listen to in the future. And we're going to send you a gift and a handwritten thank you note because we really appreciate our Tie Grabbers. Also, don't forget we have a shop where you can buy all kinds of TCB merch. And the holidays are coming, so we'd really appreciate it if you could use us as one of your ways to give a gift to your other true crime friends.
Right.
So until next week, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your feedback. And we'll see you at the quiet end.
Pull up a chair and sit down with us.
And have a beer.
You bet.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.